Hello and welcome. We are thrilled to have you with us for this World Vision Ignite Learning Series webinar. This is a webinar designed for you, a free limited run series. And my name is Derek Skiva. I am one of the leaders with World Vision Ignite. This is a learning partnership that equips young people like you to become global leaders with a biblical worldview. You don't have to wait until you grow up and become an adult to change the world. You can do it today. Isn't that great news that you can make a difference even as you are a kid? You can find out more at worldvision.org/ignite to see how Ignite can be brought to your school or into your home. You are going to love our speaker today. And honestly, we are going to tackle a tough topic, but we are going to tell you some great stories about the amazing things that we are seeing around the world about how to protect children. There's really nothing more important in life than making sure that the next generation has the ability to lead a happy and fulfilling and safe life full of potential. To see anything bad happen to kids, to see anything that would stay with them and impact their future, it really is indescribable when you think about it. And the amount of bad stuff that is happening in the world, it's a bit sobering. I know that I had a reality check here when we were preparing this webinar, but we are going to learn how we can be part of the difference made in the world. So I am thrilled to introduce our speaker. He is a longtime World Vision leader, and right now he helps countries in Asia with their fundraising. Jeff Lee, if you wanted to start your video there and let us see you. Jeff, you have a great life story, a sense of humor, a dad, once a kid. Same with me, he plays hockey. So thank you for joining us, Jeff.
Yes, good morning, Derek. How are you?
I am doing great. I know that we have people coming in from across the country right now, tuning in to see this. So Jeff, I see your family right there.
Yeah, that's my wife. My wife is a psychologist and works with kids and families, and my two daughters, they're both in college, but during this time of COVID, they happen to be home.
Well, that's good. More time with them. They have no excuse. You get to see them every day.
Yeah, we get to enjoy life with the kids at home, just like everybody else is doing in this country, I think.
Yes. Well, great to see your beautiful family there. And I know that they have had a reality check in their own lives as they have grown up and seen a different world than many of us see as they've seen your work with World Vision and travels around the world. But we want to learn not only about you, but everybody out there. So let's get to know each other. So go to the bottom of your screen and there's a button that says chat. So open up your chat and here is our question of the week. Actually, we have two questions for you. Number one, what is your favorite hobby? And with all the quarantine stuff with COVID, it sure seems like a lot of people are picking up some dormant hobbies and doing all sorts of stuff. I've seen woodworking, all sorts of stuff like that. So what's your favorite hobby? Question two, Netflix or Hulu or something else? Are you streaming anything? Or do you proclaim that the only way to enjoy books or stories is through the printed copies that you have, big leather-bound books? But I bet you're streaming something. So we see Hiking in the Great Outdoors from Eric, Disney Plus from John. Okay, Jeff, I see Mandalorian is so good. Have you seen that?
I've seen parts of it. It's kind of like the Wild West in space.
Okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. Mandalorian, that's with Baby Yoda, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I've seen these really cute images of Baby Yoda. Where is that coming from? I'm gonna have to check that out. Okay, The Office on Netflix, yes. YouTube TV, this is good. Not a promotion for YouTube TV, but I know we were talking about that earlier. Okay, so thanks for chiming in. Now you know how to chat. So we want to hear from you. For everybody that's joining us live and not seeing this recorded, chat with us. We want to hear what you're thinking. If we're not addressing it in the moment, we're going to have some time at the end of our webinar to go through some of the questions. So this is a two-way street. That's the cool thing about a webinar. So Jeff, thanks again for joining us today. You've had an amazing life. You've been a pastor. You've been in corporate sales. You've had multiple positions at World Vision International. Now you're helping fundraising across Asia as a consultant out to see best practices there. But you're a husband. You're a dad. You were born in Korea, not too long after the Korean War ended. And this is where World Vision began, is in Korea, as Bob Pierce came alongside local pastors and leaders there. And this amazing ministry began and sponsorship began. And in fact, your life story intersects with World Vision pretty early on. This is something that you have been hearing about for your whole life. So spend a couple of minutes here telling us a bit about yourself and about your time with World Vision.
Derek, back when there was a Korean War, really grateful to the Americans because they entered the war and were able to push back the communists. And now we have a divided Korea, unfortunately. But in many ways, we're very fortunate for those who were in South Korea because we got to experience freedom and democracy. But not less than 10 years, I was born in 1961. Since the war. And back then, there wasn't LG, Kia, Hyundai, Samsung, any of those kind of products. In fact, because Korea was in a war less than 10 years when I was born, by that time, there was a lot of disarray. There were still bombed out buildings, still orphans and widows, and many people who were vulnerable and displaced. And I grew up in a rural community. My dad was a rural church pastor. And I experienced poverty just the same way a lot of the kids that we work with at World Vision do. I'm fortunate and blessed to have immigrated to Canada and then now into the United States. But back then when kids were really young and they were abandoned and there was they're missing their mom and dad, or maybe they had died in a bombing or in the war situation, a lot of the little kids that were 2 or 3, when they would go sleep at night and find a place to sleep, unfortunately, a lot of the kids lost their fingers and toes because the rats would run up to them and bite their little digits off. And so if you go into foreign countries today where there's orphans and little children running around, you'll see sometimes kids missing their toes or their fingers, and it's because of rats. And so children are very vulnerable in those kinds of situations. And one good story I want to tell you is that my mother would tell me, don't ever drink that water, because she was a nurse and she said, you need to boil the water first because the water was unclean. And World Vision works in a big time way with water. And it's so cool, but we take water for granted because we have clean water. But in those communities, when mom wasn't looking, I would steal some water in the summertime when it's really hot from the pump well. And but a few weeks later, I get sick. And my mother knew that I had been drinking that water without milk. And so in the water are those waterborne diseases like, worms. And so she would give me deworming medicine, and all the little ones, they would get killed through the medicine, and they'd flush out in your stool. But the big ones, they don't die. They just get hurt from the medicine. So they crawl out of your esophagus.
Oh my gosh.
I don't want it to gross anybody during lunch hour, but I tell you, that's how kids live in the developing world. And I remember pulling a few out myself. So there you go.
It is indescribable for those of us who have not experienced this, to imagine what it is like to have to deal with the situation that evolves with dirty water and all of the ramifications of that, just to get a drink of clean water. It's really strange to think about that for so many of us, but you have seen that yourself. You have lived that yourself. And I know that that is a way that you've been able to connect with people, to bridge that divide between people in the developing world right now and people here. So thank you for sharing a bit about your story. Jeff, if you happen to have, I don't know that you do, but if you happen to have any other audio on right now, if you could mute that. We're getting some weird feedback, but I think it'll be okay, but not sure. Anyway, I just saw a note from our webinar folks. So Jeff, you have been shaped by your environment. I have too. We're going to open up chat again to tell us about an adult who has helped shape who you are. So I know for me, I could think back on my parents. I think back on the impact that my wife has had on my life, a few people in my career, my pastor and friend Eugene, his teaching, but just the way he has lived his life and modeled his life, also from Korea, actually. So the tenacity that your parents had, that your dad had, we were talking earlier, this is the person that has really shaped your life.
Yeah, my dad was a person that came to know Christ from a nominal Buddhist family and became a Christian. And at one time, my dad was the chief editor of the UN newspaper in Korea, which is a very prestigious position. Wow. And worked in the same office as President Park Chung-hee back then. And he asked my dad to be the secretary of the Korean government, but because my dad made a vow to serve God after he got out of the army, he turned the position down. So it was a really historical and pivotal moment, but you know, here we are, all of our family, my brother, my sister, and all of us are trying to serve people and trying to serve God by loving God and loving people.
That's it. The greatest commandment, love God, love your neighbors. I think we make it so complicated in life, you know, of what do we do? There's so much confusion. What do we do? How do we live a Christian life? That simplicity, that lens of loving God and loving others. So many decisions can be simplified when we think of that. So thank you about that. Okay, who else are you throwing out here? We see Charlotte. My best friend has been a huge influence on your life. Rachel, my mom. So Mother's Day, I know that we have been celebrating moms here within the last week. So yeah, those people who have had an outsized influence on us are often those adults in our lives that are trying to keep us safe. And we want to make sure that all kids have that feeling of safety, security in their life. So this is the topic today. We want to make sure that kids can grow up and just be kids, have education, have a safe drink of water, like you experienced firsthand, but just to be safe. What a huge problem in the world today, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. It is a huge problem in the world. And I want to kind of illustrate this a little bit about why we need child protection. You know, there's a picture of my daughter when she was a little girl, and I used to coach her in hockey. And she said, Dad, there's so many boys out here and they're so strong. And I said, well, I know you have to wade through the boys, but when you do, you have all this protection. And I play hockey because I grew up in Canada. I got her into hockey, but I brought my hockey glove,
hey,
my elbow pad here, you can see, and then my helmet, which is really important. It's really important because life moves really quickly when you play hockey. See, people are going 15 to 25 miles an hour. It's the fastest team sport in the world. And I think life moves at us very quickly too today, because we're seeing that only a few months ago, we're able to do all these things that have been quite normalized for a long time. And now, instead of being socially networked in one way, in physical presence, we have to be socially distant. And so because of this coronavirus pandemic, things are very different. But similarly, around the world, there's been a systemic need and you know, an issue, and that is that children need our protection, and adults provide that protection in our family, in a lot of good families that they do. But we sometimes can take that for granted because we live in the Western world and we live in a very well-developed situation where we have some of the world's wealthiest people live in this world, in this part of the world. So we don't actually experience what kids go through in other parts of the world. But children experience life very differently from adults. So if you live in poverty and you've grown up there, you can be very vulnerable. You can be open or left open because you don't have the economic status that you need. You'll also lack the legal status and access to legal rights. And how children do in all aspects of their lives reflect in the overall health and development of the family, the community and societies that we live in. And so a community where children are valued and protected is a community where children will thrive. World Vision tells us, children tell World Vision actually, that violence is the biggest concern affecting them today globally, no matter where they live, in all regions, all nations, whether you're in Africa or the Middle East or Australia or even Papua New Guinea or in Asia or North America. It doesn't matter across all sectors of the economy. If we don't end violence against children, we risk jeopardizing the progress and losing the investment made in child survival, health, and education, well as the overall economic development. So, Derek, to answer that question real shortly, with the final point, by 2030, the world has pledged to end abuse and exploitation and trafficking in all forms of violence against torture and of children. Isn't that great? That's a great pledge. But we also
it's crazy to think that we have to pledge that, but being able to bring about the laws, the protections for kids, the visibility in countries to say children are the future. Protecting children is critical for healthy, productive societies that flourish. The economies, everything depends on this if we are protecting kids. So.
Yeah, children are the future, Derek, but children are also the present realities that they're here now. And we need to do something to protect children now. Time is not a friend. It's an urgency that we have to have. And at World Vision, we believe that a world without violence against children is possible, that preventing and addressing violence against children is an urgent and complex task, but it is possible. I want to tell you a story about a little boy that I met in Malawi. Malawi happens to be in the top 5% of the poorest countries in the world. It's in East Africa. And you might be familiar with it, but years ago it was famous because the singing songwriter artist named Madonna adopted a boy and a girl from there. Anyways, it's in East Africa, just near Kenya. So I took a group of Chinese American dentists, and we saw 1,400 patients in about a week and a half. But out of that, only one person had ever had a filling there. Why? Because that was the only person who had ever had access to a dentist. And so we asked them, well, out of these 1,400, we kept asking them, how do you brush your teeth or take care of your teeth? And sometimes they pointed to a twig on the ground, or they would just use their finger. But one man came in with 6 cracked abscessed teeth. His breath literally smelled like elephants. I know sometimes when I wake up in the morning, my wife says the same thing to me, but it smelled really bad because his gums were festering, they were bruised, they had infection, and it was black, blue, and green, literally, and they were all puffy. And so the dentist, we pulled out all 6 teeth. That's all he had left. And the next day, he was the very first one to come back, and all of us who were in that team helping to look after people's needs there in terms of oral and dentistry said, oh no, he's coming back and he's angry with us. But what we found out was he said, thank you so much. He said, this is the first time in 15 years that I had to sleep through the night without pain. And so that's a great story, but we went to a little community, little village in the afternoon to kind of talk to a little village and pray for the people there. And this little boy comes running up 4-year-old boy, really cute little guy named Deekman George. What a cool name, eh? Deekman George. And he had his best light blue shirt on, and he looked at me and he focused his laser eyes on me, and I couldn't help but pick him up. And, you know, the staff people in the community say, oh, no, don't pick him up. He wants something special. And, you know, me being from the West here, I was like, well, I was a sucker for a little boy that's really like cute. He wants.
How can you resist?
Yeah, so I picked him up, put him in my arms as we were, you know, talking to the kids, and I found out that his mom had 6 kids and lost 4 already, and that his dad was an alcoholic that came and went whenever he pleased. And I saw the hut where they lived and the things that they were trying to grow to keep the family alive, and it was just barren. It was just gray. It was just dusty. It was. I thought, how can you grow anything? And then Deekman George, he ripped open his shirt to show me something. And underneath his shirt, he had a big tumor. It was the size of a 6-inch Subway, you know, sandwich. And it was a lymphoma. So
and this is a little boy with this big tumor, and I'm sure that he is already malnourished. So this just must look so alarming.
Absolutely. And I was struck by how if the mom lost Deekman George, it would be the 5th kid that she would lose. So the next day I commandeered the Land Cruiser, you know, the Toyota Land Cruiser 4x4, whatever it was, you know, it was a 4x4. We went over 14 kilometers over very rough terrain to a hospital. And on the halfway there was under a tree, a rest stop where somebody had 2 coolers, one with drinks like sodas and one with crackers and cookies. And so I bought him some, and his eyes lit up because he got a Fanta soda for the first time, and he was tasting cookies for the first time. And I could relate to him, Derek, because I remember when I was a little boy and I was really hungry growing up in Korea right after the Korean War. And my dad brought home a US surplus of peanut butter, which is not Skippy or Jiffy's, it's US Army surplus. But when I ate that, it was so good that for the next 2 years, all I could think of before I went to sleep was the craving for more peanut butter. And when I was sleeping, I would dream about peanut butter because it was so good. I craved and I longed it. And I thought, that's what we're here to do, is that, you know, the scriptures tell us in the Bible, in the book of Psalms, that taste and see that God is good, that our opportunity and our mission in life should be to help the poor and the kids see and taste that God is good, like Deekman George. And today, I was able to give him surgery after, you know, having diagnosed and everything. And today he has a big scar here on his chest, but he's alive because people, you know, I'm not a hero. When God gives us an opportunity, we're moved to do something for them, to protect them in their health and take care of them.
Jeff, you were relaying this story to me yesterday, and there was an element of this that was so amazing to me, is the way that God provides in these circumstances when we know this is the right thing to do. You had $200 and you had the ability to do something with that. And as I recall, it cost about $40 to get the transportation. Is that right?
Yeah, it was $40 for the testing.
Oh, the testing.
Yeah, the diagnosis. So to do the x-ray and the testing at the hospital. And, you know, he could never afford that because they don't even make $1 a day, you know. And then the other one was that it was $160 to do the surgery because they had 2 doctors who were doing a practicum from the Netherlands, the Dutch doctors. And, you know, I'm 6'1", and they were like these 2 lady doctors who were 6'6". So it was amazing. You know, I know that you are Dutch, and there's some of the tallest people in the world are Dutch, but I was amazed that these 2 Dutch ladies, I saw them as the angel of God giving him surgery, and I had exactly enough money to give him surgery.
Isn't that incredible? You had $200 and you knew, God, I got to do something here. And it cost actually $200 to do that. So
yeah, I mean, it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do the surgery here.
Isn't that crazy? But Jeff, you focused in on a child, but the global need is huge.
Yeah, Derek, the global need is just immense because there's violence, and violence is the world's worst crime against children. Now, it affects 1.7 billion children each year in each country, in each city and community. No matter where you go, whether it's in the United States or Canada or Korea or other parts of the world, whether it's wealthy or poor, violence against children is an issue. And 1.7 billion, I mean, how do you put a number to that? Well, it's pretty hard to put any kind of number to that, except that, maybe in the United States, we have 340 million people. So if you take a bunch of countries and do the math, the bunch of countries like the United States and do the math, maybe you might get to 1.7 billion, so it'd be quite a few United States in terms of.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's half the population of the entire United States well, no, 1.7 billion. I was thinking, okay, no, I'm totally wrong. That is states. And children are at risk everywhere, and the different types of risk, bullying. I mean, we see this. I'm sure that kids here on the chat, if you're in junior high, high school, you get this, you see this.
Yeah, bullying is a huge thing because online, I was in the Philippines with World Vision. I found out there was a city of angels. Now, I live near Los Angeles, but there's a city called the City of Angels in the Philippines, north of Manila. And it was the #1 center for child exploitation and sexual deviation where adults come to have sex with children. And it was so terrible when I heard that I wanted to go there and stop it myself, but I knew that I couldn't do anything on my own. But I'm glad that World Vision is working there on behalf of the children. But bullying against children by adults and by other children, sometimes older children against the younger children, and taking advantage of them is something that we need to stop. The next one is child labor. Statistics tells us that of the estimated 168 million children engaged in child labor today, 85 of them are being subjected to hazardous labor, which endangers their health and well-being or prevents them from gaining skills and knowledge to have the brightest future possible. Now, when I was traveling in India with World Vision, I found out a lot of young children without the opportunity to go to school and to gain an education, to have a brighter hope for the future, because their mom and dad are so needy, or one is sick, and they've grown up in poverty, they have to work rather than go to school. And so they have no access to hope for a brighter future. The next one is child soldiers. For tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of children, there is no choice. There's no options for them when it comes to joining armed groups. They're forced and coerced into it. It's either, listen, it's kill or be killed. And they're promised an education and a protection and a future from these armies, like in certain parts of Congo and Africa. But once involved, they get involved in that lifestyle, it is very difficult for them to escape, even though they know that it's wrong. I remember one time in Los Angeles working with World Vision and having met with a former child soldier who is now working to protect children. It was amazing to hear his story of the guilt and of the shame and of being in that situation, but how he couldn't get out. But somehow the Lord, and through people who loved him and through World Vision, he was able to get out and now become an ambassador and advocate for those issues with children. The next one is child marriage. Last week, I think you guys talked to Margot about this conversation.
That's right, Margot Day.
Yeah, right. It's a significant issue in the world. How many times have I traveled to places like India, or the Southeast Asia, and I have heard of stories of young girls. I have 2 daughters, and I've heard of young girls at 11, 12 years of age, 14.
I have an 11-year-old. I mean, this is just horrifying to think about, of getting married at that time.
Exactly. But, they're forced into marriage, sometimes because of a dowry. Sometimes because their mom and dad are really poor, they could get something. Other times it's because somebody comes to the community, like in Cambodia, and says, hey, listen, I've got a television and I've got an air conditioner that I'll give you if you let your child go and it would get married. And so in these kinds of situations, these kids need to be, these children, these girl children need to be protected. In 2016 alone, an estimated 5.6 million girls under the age of 18 became child brides. And that's tragic.
It changes everything. When you are married at that age, you have kids earlier, your education goes by the wayside, and then you are stuck. You're in this cycle and we can't break out of it. So being able to stop child marriage and the rites of passage surrounding that, it's of critical importance. And I know World Vision is right in the middle of that. So if you missed last week's talk with Margot Day, please go back and watch that recorded video. So corporal punishment is another huge thing when kids are, face the wrath and experience some huge violence from their families and others.
Yeah, Derek, I think that in a lot of countries where mom or dad, oftentimes it's the dad, that they don't know how to deal with being in poverty or loss of job or depressed. A lot of times they can take it out on their kids. And it's so sad because, sometimes we treat the children who are the little as the least of these. And but Jesus said, hey, let the little children come to me. Even his disciples were thinking, Jesus, too VP, too important, right? Very important person, VIP person for us to let the little kids come. But he said, no, let the little children come to me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. And so that's another one. And then finally, the two more are the refugees and vulnerable kids. Children are the most vulnerable victims of conflict due to a lot of factors. Besides being among many civilian casualties during armed conflict, and there's lots of stories. I'm going to tell you one right. It's soon, right after this. Children may be orphaned or separated from their families. Oftentimes, children also the oldest one become the head of household, which leaves them vulnerable to forced labor, sexual exploitation, or recruitment in the armed forces. And then finally, the abuse. And so we need to protect children, just like we protect ourselves with equipment in the life of hockey. In real life, we need to protect children.
Let's give kids those tools and to be an advocate for them. Jeff, you have had some life-changing, enlightening, heartbreaking moments seeing the risk of kids around the world. I know one of my first glimpses at this was when I was with the organization World Concern and going throughout Southeast Asia. This is a photo here from Bangladesh. This kid is on the top of a garbage heap searching for recycling. It smelled as bad as it looks, just awful, awful. And someone that looks like it, maybe his dad out there also sorting through the rubbish, other kids out there. This kid should be in school. He's 8 years old, 7 years old? He should be in school. That was incredibly moving to see that, heartbreaking. And then when I was in Cambodia at the border of Thailand to see child laborers there, this boy pulling a cart. It looks like this is concrete or some sort of heavy grain that he was pulling around on this cart, and an adult picks it up, and then he's off to go get his next load. And while I was there, I saw other kids wandering around in the streets and looking for help. So just alarming what is happening in our day and age. And what I saw I'm sure some of what you saw, this is just on the surface. This is what is happening in public. But violence against children is affecting more than 1.7 billion kids every year, as you were saying. And more than 3/4 of people around the world know a child victim of violence. So most of us know someone that has been a victim of violence. One thing so we're going to be getting into the response here in just a moment, but one thing that I want to encourage us about when we're hearing all this is that we can make a difference. So we're hearing all this alarming stuff right now in this presentation about child exploitation, et cetera. The way that we conduct our lives daily can have a positive impact on kids. So who likes chocolate? I'm sure that most people here like chocolate. Kids love chocolate. And yet the chocolate we buy, you've probably done some reading about this, the chocolate we buy can actually endanger kids if it is not harvested properly. So this is a local company here in Seattle, Theo Chocolate. There are many companies out there that have this as a value through Fair for Life or fair trade. This is not a perfect mechanism for policing all of the potential child labor, but it is definitely a step in the right direction. So watch what kind of chocolate you buy. So just look for these labels on the bottom. The kind of chocolate chips you buy, we make a lot of chocolate chip cookies apparently. So I have like 3 of these. But so this is not necessarily the big prominent brand. This is the store brand for Kroger. But look, there is fair trade here. So a step in the right direction. The kinds of coffee we buy, look for the shade grown coffee. So there's a million decisions that we could make through our daily lives and consumption that have an impact on the lives of kids. The technology we buy, the precious metals in these phones, these are sometimes harvested by kids. So read up on the companies that you're supporting to make sure that they have policies in place that protect kids. Clothes, different manufacturers of clothes do better than others. So there's a lot that we could do with this. So we can respond to this. And Jeff, you have stories about individuals that have been impacted, that you have seen these, when we are able to single out a child and help them. So can you share the story about Kim?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I met Kim Colarossi back in, I think, October, around the fall of last year. And I heard her story, which was that she was a donor to World Vision. And she was helping kids because she really wanted to do something because she was helped herself. I said, what do you mean by that? So I called her, and she lives in San Diego, not too far from me, about an hour south. And we met up, and she shared with me her story. And that is that when she was 2 years old, just after the Korean War, she was abandoned by her mom or dad. We don't know who, but she thinks it was her mom who abandoned her. And so they took her to an orphanage, and this orphanage was run by World Vision and Bob Pierce, the founder. So Bob Pierce, the founder, and the Korean founder, Reverend Han, were running this orphanage. And in this orphanage, so this picture looks a lot like what Korea was in 1950, not with the K-pop and the BTS stars, that kind of a thing.
We love that, though.
Yeah, I know. I wish I was younger. But back then, this is what it used to look like in Korea. And these are the children. And she was one of these kids. She was left by her mom and dad and left to fend for herself. And she didn't know what was going on. But because Bob took a liking to her situation, was able to find and contact a church in Oregon in the United States, and was able to get her adopted out. And so she told me the story, and she said, Jeff, would you help me find the orphanage where I was adopted? And so I contacted World Vision Korea, and all of these other people that are standing around beside her are World Vision Korea staff, except for the person who's standing directly left to her. And Kim Colarossi is the one in the colorful dress, right? But that's her son, Nick. And he came along to see the journey of where Kim was. And so we went back, and the staff at Korea, they did 1 month of research, a whole department, and they did investigative research. And, sometimes you can't find these kinds of information because, today we have everything on Google and Docs and digital, but back then, this was a war-torn situation, very chaotic, and they didn't know, but they found her document. And she got so excited because they found out what orphanage she came from. And so we were able to take her back, and she was able to see our office in World Vision Korea that was and instrumental in helping her get adopted. And then she was also able to go to this orphanage, which is now a child disability center that's run by the government. So it morphed into that. And she was so grateful. She said, Jeff, I want to tell you something. With tears in her eyes, she said, I want to make a donation to World Vision and then to this orphanage, because without them, I wouldn't have had the same hope. I wouldn't have been able to come to the United States, got married, and had my son, Nick, which is on her left. And she has 4 boys, not only Nick, but 3 others. They weren't able to come with her, but she was able to bring Nick along. And so she said, I'm standing here with Nick saying thank you to World Vision for allowing this to happen and giving me hope. And so it's a really good story of this wonderful lady who lives in San Diego. And I just met her back in the fall of this past year.
That is so cool, Jeff. I'm reminded of the parable of the lost sheep. So many of these parables that Jesus told were of looking for that person and seeing the person that is in need at the moment. So what the World Vision Korea team did there of doing that research and finding some of her family history, what healing that must have done for her to see that, and what amazing work being done in Korea. And so often we could think that we are the heroes. We want to put on the cape and say, we did this. But even at the founding of World Vision, Bob Pierce, the incredible founder of World Vision, he was working with Pastor Han in Korea. There's a story in Christianity Today, I'm going to throw it on the chat here, that if you want to look into this a little bit more, there are so many untold stories of these incredible people of faith and conviction living this out in such a powerful way. So thank you for telling us about Kim and the impact that it's had on her life and the reverberations of that impact, I'm sure, and how she has seen and cared for others. Just such a cool.
Yeah. So, I think that is an important point, Derek, that we're going to make here, that you've just illustrated along with me in sharing the Kim Kalarasi story. She was able to receive hope and help and get adopted through World Vision. And now she wanted to give back. And so she made a donation to World Vision Korea, to World Vision USA, and to that orphanage. All 3 points with tears in our eye and gratitude, and the evidence of that new life through people protecting her life was in the beauty of having 4 sons, including Nick. And so, I wanted to share it now. What is World Vision's response? And that's that. How can you help as well? And this is what you can do. Number 1, the solution to end violence against children clearly exists. We know this because we see it in action. Violence against children is a complex issue, and so is the solution. It's not an easy topic, right? I saw somebody in the chat earlier say this is a tough subject. And I know that my daughters, both of them, when we went to the Philippines on a mission trip, and they saw a little boy without legs. And he was a little guy, and he was pulling himself on the ground, which was really dirty. And he was all dirty himself and disheveled, but because no one helped him, it burned in their heart to do something to help this little boy. And I know that you might be feeling that right now. But to do something, it's complex, and the solutions are not that easy. And so what do? Well, World Vision approaches it holistically. And we look at every aspect of a child's life and every sector that has influence in their life so that we can address the diverse cause of violence and find the keys to ending it so that they can be protected. World Vision works and is engaged with everyone who has a responsibility to protect children. We start with their families and then with faith communities. We then extend to teachers, schools, and institutions and local traditional leaders. It might be a tribal leader there, the elders. Then we work with the institutions further with hospitals, with the police, with government agencies, and the courts to ensure that children can be protected. We don't just help children out of dangerous situations. We work and with and among communities to address the root causes of violence, such as poverty and social stigma, that often lead to abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and other forms of violence against children. World Vision works relentlessly advocating for an end to violence against children, highlighting it when it occurs and holding those responsible to account. World Vision also works to prevent violence, whatever occurs, so that no child has to experience it. Today, we're working with survivors and strengthening the systems and services available to them to ensure that they have the chance to heal and recover. Finally, we will amplify. That means we will kind of, declare, shout out their stories and voices so that people can know what's happening to them and that these systemic injustices can be rectified.
That's something that's interesting, Jeff. Since I've been at World Vision, there's a mindset here. We don't want to say that kids are voiceless, but we want to help them raise their voice because they have opinions, they have thoughts, they need to have a forum, they need to have somebody hear them who is in power. So we help facilitate that.
Yeah, I've often visited communities. I was in El Salvador where I saw this young little lady. I wouldn't say she was a lady, but she was acting like somebody who was really empowered. I think she was 12 or 13 years old. Her name is Wendy. And she was saying, here's what we're going to do in our community. And what she felt was that World Vision had educated her to the point where she felt empowered and she could take leadership herself. And so children's creativity and concrete actions can help move the adult world so that they become more responsive to injustices in a powerful and very transformative ways. All of World Vision's successful experiences tell us that empowered children, those who are involved and heard and equipped, are instrumental in triggering changes, attitudes, and norms that ensure lasting solutions to violence against children. That's really hope, right?
I love it. I love it. All voices at the table, not just the voices of a few, hearing the real experiences of kids, having the decision-making process be inclusive of the entire community rather than just a few. I've seen it happen in villages to where the people, when you first enter a community, it might be a few guys that are the tribal leaders, but then in time, when there are some innovators in the community that take that risk, that get the training, that are going out there, their lives start to change and then other people see it. And Jeff, you were talking just a couple minutes ago about that this is complicated, that there are many different factors in this. That's why we do child sponsorship. That's why we have a community-wide approach to this, because we could just be an organization that focuses on preventing a type of violence, or we could just do clean water, which we are the largest non-government provider of clean water in the world. We could do one of these things, but to see the fullness of life come to be, it's the societal change, the willingness to see everybody and to address all of the factors of life that comes through sponsorship and this type of community development that World Vision is all about. So, and there are ways to take action here that we have to share as well.
Yeah, I think by doing something, by campaigning and raising the awareness, children and young people, even yourself here on this webinar, can make a significant difference. We don't have to be overwhelmed. We can't do something for everybody, but we can do something right now for one person or two or three or four, whatever that means. We can take action. And so time, again, is not a friend. Time is an enemy. So we have to take the urgency into our own hands, because we can make significant changes in the lives of millions of children across the world. So here's the call to action, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Will you share that part?
So we want you to be aware of a petition of the It Takes a World campaign that benefits children, their voices, their futures. So we'll drop that in the chat here. Raise awareness. You've heard about Greta, the young lady that has gone across the ocean to raise awareness about climate change. She has an outsized voice, but it's because she's a kid that is brave enough to speak up to the adults and say, hey, you're affecting my future. You're affecting the future of my generation. So people do listen to kids, especially when they are out there advocating. So check out the other webinar that we did earlier in this series about advocacy and how you can be an advocate. Even if you can't vote, your legislators are supposed to be representing you. So even if you are a kid and you are not of voting age, contact your legislator. So you could do that. Donating to organizations like World Vision, sponsoring a child is a great way. There's the Global 6K for Water that's happening this weekend. You could do it anytime, but check that out. This is to raise awareness about the water crisis in the world. It is ridiculous that 1 in 10 people on the planet don't have clean water even today, but we can change that. So check that out and pray. God moves in amazing ways. And I expect, Jeff, that when you were there in that community with your dentist friends in Malawi, that there were some prayers uttered there of what do I do with this kid who is right here in front of me with this giant tumor? The Lord works. He inspires us and he provides a way for action.
Yes, that's so true, Derek. I wrestled that night, couldn't sleep well. And so I said, I got to try to do something. And, you know, I think that's where it starts. It's in our heart where we hear these things and we're not overwhelmed and we're not callous to it, but we respond and say, what can I do? I got to do something. And I got to give some kind of hope. And it's that kind of that heart action step that allows us to, you know, to take a step in helping kids. You know, today, I mean, I remember growing up poor, there were always people who had the heart of God. They were kind. They wanted to love people and they wanted to love God and they wanted to do something good. And I think you're here today listening to this because God has given you that opportunity and you want to do that. So you know, there's 10.2 million children who benefited from World Vision's child protection work. And we're a part of 157 policy changes to improve that. We want you to be encouraged to be part of that as well in the future, that over 200,000 adults and parents and caregivers have learned about child protection and prevention. In the Philippines, for example, a World Vision-led project reduced the use of children in the sugarcane industry that resulted in child labor rates decreasing from 74% to 14%. That's staggering. 3 years. And so we know that advocacy and raising awareness and education does do the thing. In Kenya, we've worked with communities to change attitudes and beliefs about child marriage, ensuring young girls go to school instead. In a global effort across governments, organizations, and people have prevented about 25 million child marriages over the last 10 years. Just amazing stats. There's more and more, but I think we're getting to the end of the time, so I want to give you the time to do question and answering.
Thank you for that, Jeff. If there are any questions that you do have here, throw them in the chat. So we're getting some references to some books. There's a great book, if you like Jeff's stories about peanut butter. I will always write back. Annie shared this, and so you can look that up. I will always write back. We'll have to check that out. And hey, I mentioned chocolate. You can make a difference in the lives of kids by eating chocolate. Isn't that cool? You could eat chocolate and help kids because you'd be supporting companies, if you choose the right ones, that actually make that choice to watch their supply chains. So there's a variety of ways you could help. If there are any more questions, we will see this. But Jeff, I am really looking forward to next week's webinar. It's actually going to be a recorded one because we have a great interview that we have done between Steve Haas, one of our best speakers at World Vision. You might have remembered him from an earlier series. And the author of this book, I think it might be backwards on your screen, I'm not sure, Running for My Life. This is Lopez Lamong. So Lopez a hero of mine. I got to meet him briefly just as we were setting this up. We were mentioning, Jeff, about child soldiers. Lopez was a child soldier at the age of 6. He was abducted from a church service and was in this incredibly bad situation. And out of just the grace of God, just a miracle, he was able to get out of his horrible situation into a refugee camp. In the refugee camp for 10 years, imagine that. And his main source of food, the best food, was from a garbage dump. Just crazy to think about these things. You saw the picture earlier of the kid in the garbage dump. But then he went on, he saw a vision of, he knew he was a great runner. He saw a vision of a U.S. Olympic athlete. He says, I want to do that. And then he had a chance to immigrate to the U.S. as a refugee. And now he's on the U.S. Olympic team and we get to talk to him. So this is a book, Running for My Life. I recommend you checking this out. And he is also part of our Ignite program. So if you sign up for Ignite or your school does, you'll get to hear about Lopez in greater detail. So yeah, there are so many great ways to make a difference. So have you been to Australia? Jess says. I haven't. Jeff, have you?
Yes, I've been to Australia.
Yes. And we know that a lot of the great support for World Vision internationally is coming from our friends in Australia. We have a call out Running for My Life. It's so good. So Jeff, any closing words here?
Just that you can do something, and that just providing the kindness from your heart, express it. And if you see an opportunity, step into it, because all of us, our job is to kind of like, hey, let others taste and see that God is good by sharing love and kindness, like with Deep Gaman George and Kim Colarossi and all of the others, and yourself, Derek, and all of these people that are on this call. I know that the encouraging thing for you is to now to put it into action, what you've heard in your own way, in your own world, with your own expression. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing your stories, your passion, your heart. We will see you next week, and expect that email from us with a link to this great video of Lopez Lomong. It's a virtual webinar just in the form of a video that you'll see. So thank you. You can make decisions every day that impact the lives of kids. Be an advocate, and thanks. All right. Bye.